So our first slide here is pretty cool. What do we use this data that looks like stock market there? But if we go to our next slide, let me just ask you, when you think about data, what comes to mind? Let me borrow the chat for you guys. Numbers, stories, statistics. What else comes to mind? Too much or not enough. I love it. Yes. So true. So let me keep going here on our next slide. So as we say, it all starts with measurement. What's being measured, how and when it's measured, and how it's being used. And that story of graphs and tables, too much and not enough, statistics, can actually be, as we go to the next slide, both the quantitative data, so the numbers and tables and graphs, that pie chart I showed you, the percentages that I showed you, or it could be qualitative data, data about stories, information you talk to a student who, or an exit interview. Data doesn't need to be numeric to be useful, but it can certainly be that way.
And it can also help us understand, I think, the numeric data. When I was at the University of North Dakota, we did a survey of all of our incoming freshmen called the SERP survey, and those students reported that they had one of the most highly diverse experiences of any college student in the country. And we had to sort of shake our heads, scratch our heads a bit about it, because North Dakota is 95% white and the campus was 90% white. And we really tried to figure out what this diversity piece was. And so we did focus groups of students where they told us that, they came from such homogeneous villages in North Dakota, where they all went to the same church, they all went to the same school, that coming to the big city of Grand Forks of 50,000, and literally the Lutherans meeting the Jews was for them a very diverse experience. So it helped us better understand their perspective and how they were reporting that data. Whereas obviously for students who were going to much more diverse urban settings, we knew they were having a more diverse experience the way we thought about it, but not the way the students thought about that.
It's a great example of how qualitative data, particularly from those about whom the data reports, is useful to make sense of the numerical data that you have. So bearing in mind that, so data is just everywhere. If we move to the next one, Jason,
this one?
Yeah, data has been generated in diverse shapes and sizes. It's some of your campuses will have an institutional research group or person who crunches data. Sometimes it is data that is built into your system. Sometimes it's just simply reported on. It's also suspect. So let me go to my next slide, which is the V slide. You have data about what people do, about how many people get D's, F's, and withdraw, how many people complete a semester, how many graduate. These V slides, V issues, just because there can be data faster and faster doesn't mean necessarily that it's manageable, useful, or trustworthy. So you need to have data to be manageable. As Hamilton said, it's either too much or not enough. It needs to be useful. It needs to lead to some kind of insight that's accurate. It needs to be stored somewhere where you can get it, and needs to be accurate and trustworthy. And the story of how you get it to that way is a conversation for consideration before you try to do anything with analytics. Some other points about data, the colleges and this is the next slide, Jason, the colleges and universities have begun to think about how to organize around data, things about access and affordability, progress, completion, workforce. These are the questions that campuses will ask. So are all of your students succeeding? I mean, you've got a graduation rate of 65% or a retention rate of the freshmen are coming back to your institution the next year at the rate of 65%, but are all of them doing, who's doing that? Is it all of the students who are on scholarship? It is all the students who have done well last year? Is it all of the students of color? Who's doing it? How do you disaggregate the data? And do those differences, does that make a difference to the people who are aware of the data and know that it's meaningful? So if you wanted to get a question about how you, how well your graduation rate is going, or how well students are progressing from course A to course B in your critical course sequence, you want to know the answer to the question, for whom? Is it all working? Or are there some groups that are not working well? That's the disaggregation question. Jason, anything you want to add to this one?
No, I think you hit it pretty well. Great.
So let me give you the big roadmap. This is the sequence of data analytics, the next slide. As when I talked about the budget last time to know your campus goals, I'm going to start with goals again, because that's what needs to start everything. So you start with your goals. What do you want to know? What are you trying to accomplish in your data understanding? You design your data collection in a way that allows you to meet those goals. So if what you want to know is who finished with a B or better in your organic chemistry class, the answer to that question means that you got to know who B or better is, and you got to know what the characteristics of the who are. So just knowing the student number isn't going to tell you much, but knowing something about their characteristics, where they were in the program, zip code that they grew up in, whether they're on scholarship, whatever it is that you want to know to be able to understand the data that you get. And then this sequence of then collect the data, refine it into knowledge, communicate it to the people for whom that will make a difference in their work, create some kind of policy, and act to continuously improve. If any of you have lived in the world of accreditation and program assessment and student learning assessment, this will sound familiar to you. This is the cycle of figure out what you want to know, assess whether or not you've reached it, use that information to plan what you need to do differently, implement the things that you're going to do differently, and institute a new policy. Same kind of structure of trying to use data to make a difference in what it is that you do. Go on, next one. So some of the questions that that programs ask, that campuses ask, are these. Who do we retain from year to year? How do we track the rate of second-year students who achieve sophomore standard? What happens when a student withdraws from a course or gets a D or an F? What's the next thing that happens? What's the average success rates in the 25 to 35 courses with the largest annual enrollment? That's something that your campus is probably going to ask. Your departments may not ask that. What's the success rate in the first credit-bearing math course, and for whom is it successful? So you can begin to think in this, just in those examples, of the kinds of questions you might have about your programs and your students. Who's doing well in my intro course? If they do well in my intro course, do they also do well in my advanced courses? Or if they're struggling in a particular way in my initial course, what makes them to be more successful in the subsequent courses? So those are the kinds of questions that you might want to use to guide your understanding of what the data tells you. Jason, anything?
Just to add to this, I think the who matters too, and how we break this data down, particularly in the context we're dealing with right now. Understanding what groups of students may be disproportionately affected and in certain courses or in certain sequences of courses. If you're seeing that students from underrepresented minorities, for example, are failing at a disproportionate rate from majority students, there may be some deeper questions to ask about what could be leading to that as well. And so there's a big push right now to break down this data to more finite levels so we can understand it at different impacts on different groups of students.
Yeah, so that really leads to the next slide, which is what we're used to doing here is making decisions based on our instincts. Well, they're not doing well because they party too much, or that kind of conclusion. And rather than using the student data to guide us. And that's really the message of this slide. I know that many of you are having to exit because we're over time. Let me know if you need to, Ashley and Hamilton, if you need to head out. Otherwise, I'll keep on going.
I would say this is also a screenshot from a course, a free online course we developed on data analytics and student success, which we can send the link out to everybody on. That folks are welcome to explore as well for more information on the use of predictive analytics for student success.
So going to the next slide, just a quick question for you to think about where your department is now. So this is sort of a sequence of data analytics, moving from descriptive, reporting on what happened, how many people failed, to diagnostic, analyzing why it failed. That's the for whom, what happened. Real time, what's going on now? How many people are on their way to failing now? Predictive, who do we anticipate might fail? And then prescriptive, determining what should be done about that failure or that failure path. My guess is that most of the departments are in the descriptive and diagnostic, maybe a little real time. Would you say that that's where you guys are?
Yes.
Yeah. In that, how about Ashley, where are you guys?
So I'm not chair yet. My predecessor really likes to take a little bit of data and then make a lot of decisions, and then take some more data and make a lot of decisions, and take some more data and make a lot of decisions. So we are always going like this. So I'd like to slow that down a little bit.
Yeah. Remember that goals section? Figure out what it is that you want to accomplish. That's the place to start. That sounds good.
Where you get, just to say, what the predictive pieces are where you're working with typically things like Starfish or EAB that are really trying, the more institutional level, but it can stroll down to the department to figure out student success metrics. But it's not in the department's hands per se, but the department gets this data a lot of times to figure out where students are going.
Yeah. So a quick run through the next couple of slides just to see what the possibilities are. Data can help us identify boutique programs that look good, which is the next slide and the next one. But and we all want to do something cool without necessarily knowing. This is what your predecessor did, Ashley, without necessarily knowing what practice happened. The next one is we tend to focus on amenities versus meaningful experiences.
This is actually from a university, by the way, so.
Hard to believe. You never know. Or we do things that make us feel good rather than actually something that we know for sure helps student success. That's
a good example here is that faculty love to argue for student choice in courses, that we should give them lots of freedom to explore, but we know from research, the more options we give them, actually, the more likely they are not to complete their degree, that there is value in guided pathways and helping students understand the sequencing of courses and giving them advice. Their research would show that fewer choices actually are better than more choices for a number of students.
Yeah. And who knew? You wouldn't know that without looking at the data.
Right.
Next one is data collection can prevent us from using administrative barriers to progress. So just a word about this, language matters. When we say you have a hold on your account, it means we don't want you here. Or when we say when your prerequisites haven't been fully completed, if we say you have a deficit, we're saying something that is more inhibitory than encouraging. So listening to how it is that people hear, we can see in the next slide, so what we can do with information. So what do we find out about who leaves? Well, we find out that undeclared majors leave. Then we can create a focus area, meta majors, so that it's a cluster rather than a specific major. Students leave without a clear course map. You could have incoming freshmen complete credits in a focus area. Those are examples of where you could take a question that you've asked. We want to know who leaves. And once we learn who leaves, we then look at some ways in which we could design something that would help us with that particular problem. Some other examples are course signals. Jason, this is the next one. Learning from the learning management system about who might be at risk, what credits they earn, do they engage with materials? There's some examples about that. Or even looking, the next slide is the critical course grades. Can grades be a predictor? This is particularly helpful if you're trying to disaggregate, to trying to think about, so who is it that's getting a C? What distinguishes them from the people who are getting an A? What is it about the instruction, the instructor, the student, the circumstance, all of those things prevent you from concluding that, well, that student is getting a C because they're partying at night, as opposed to they're getting a C because the instructor isn't following up with X, Y, or Z topic, or there's the bookstore is too expensive, or whatever it is that the possible reasons are that might contribute to the success that the student would have.
And in some courses, the C can be a predictor of success or not. So we often look at DFW as a predictor of success, but there are certain courses, for example, microeconomics, if you're a finance major, if you get a C in microeconomics and you're intending to major in finance in some universities, your likelihood of completing that degree is significantly less than students who have completed with an A and B. So we allow the student to progress because they passed the course, but they need to be aware that they may have to work a lot harder than other students who had earned higher grades in that class actually be able to complete the finance degree.
Yeah. So in the 1 minute that you have left before you got to head out, a quick roadmap is the next slide is data analytics for student success and implementation. You start with your goals. You get information, gather research. The notion of assessing infrastructure capacities, that means, do you have ways of collecting data? This is sometimes the hardest thing. I can't get that data, or I don't have institutional research to help me, or I don't have time to do that, to gather the data. Helpful to have that information available. Assembling a team that will look at it, take a look at how data is going to be kept private for the places that it needs to be private. And then beyond to the other pieces, I'm going to go to share and use, and to create feedback loops, again, to do continuous improvement. That's a really fast blow through data analytics. Last words for Jason, and questions from you guys.
No, just it's important to use data to make decisions. And not in the way Ashley described, always. But try to figure out what your goals are, and then try to figure out what the data says to make decisions.
Start with goals. Start with goals. Start with goals. That's probably the thing you're going to constantly hear from throughout this leadership training is, what are your goals? What are your goals?
I would say you're going to be forced to make a lot of decisions probably in the coming year, and the more you can have data to help inform those decisions, the better off you're going to be. Hamilton.
No, I was just going to, I was thinking about, what are the different kinds of goals that a department chair faces or needs to consider. So student outcomes, can you get data on like budget, like how the usefulness of various expenditures? Is that another area? I'm trying to think of different areas where you can apply this.
Gosh, anything. If what you want to know is my limited budget spent wisely, all you got to do is know how you want to define wisely. She said that, wisely is not so easy to define. Have a way to measure it, and to gather the data to address that question. That's a really good question. That's a question about, should I be doing it? This is a return on investment question. It's a great question. If I put money here, do I get X? Anything that you think of as your goal. I want to promote quality instruction. I want to promote student completion. I want to promote faculty engagement. I want to promote community engagement. Whatever it is that your priorities are, as long as you have a way of defining what the endpoint looks like wisely, and what the wisely means, you have a way to gather data to get at that.
I would say that most university and college data systems are set up to understand student success in a variety of formats, and that's probably where most department chairs start, is around enrollment data, retention data, getting down to, if you're teaching entry-level gen ed courses, looking at your DFW rates. Do you have classes where students may be failing more than others? Is there a systemic issue there? Is it a particular faculty member? Those sorts of questions are ones that are, I think, most common among department chairs.
Okay. Yeah.
If that's
Super,
helpful.
that helps. Yeah. That was awesome.
All right.
Will these slides be available somewhere?
Yes.
Yes, and I was just going to say also, we are recording this session, so it will be available too on Workplace.
Hamilton,
Thank
good
you
luck
all
with the
very
storm.
much.
Yep,
Absolutely. Yeah, good luck with the storm.
Thanks.
All
Thank
right.
you too.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Be well.